In 1980, two brilliant academics made a bet based on the fate of humanity. One predicted catastrophe, mass starvation, resource depletion, the end of prosperity. The other bet everything on human ingenuity. The stakes? 10 years, 5 medals, and $1,000. The result would shock the world, and one of them would never admit he was wrong. This is the story of the Simon Ehrlich bet, and why it matters more today than ever before. To understand the bet, we need to go back to 1968. America is in turmoil. Vietnam, civil rights, assassinations, and into this chaos drops a book that will terrify a generation. The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich. It opens with a sentence that captures the zeitgeist of doom. The battle to feed all of humanity is over. Paul Ehrlich was not a fringe figure. He was a Stanford professor, a respected ecologist who studied butterfly populations, and he was about to become the most famous scientist in America. His message was simple and terrifying. We are running out of everything. There are too many people, not enough food, and not enough resources. The math, according to Erlich, was inescapable. In 1969, Erlich wrote that, quote, most of the people who are going to die in the greatest cataclysm in the history of man have already been born. He wasn't predicting distant future problems. He was saying that people alive right now were doomed. By 1974, he was even more specific. In The End of Affluence, he prophesied that before 1985, mankind will enter a genuine age of scarcity. And people believed him. His books were bestsellers. He appeared on The Tonight Show 20 times. Politicians listened, and his ideas influenced policy worldwide. China implemented its one-child policy partly based on these fears. India pursued aggressive sterilization campaigns. The United Nations rang alarm bells. Ehrlich's logic seemed airtight. The earth is finite, resources are finite, population grows exponentially, therefore we are doomed. It was the same logic that Thomas Malthus had used back in 1798. It had been wrong then too, but we'll get to that, because in 1980, a business professor from Illinois was about to call Ehrlich's bluff. Meet Julian Simon. He didn't look like a revolutionary. No wild hair, no dramatic pronunciations, just a mild-mannered economist with thick glasses and an unusual hobby, proving doomsayers wrong. The twist? Simon himself started out as a pessimist. After getting his psychology degree from Harvard and his economics PhD from the University of Chicago, Simon initially accepted the conventional wisdom about population growth. More people meant more problems. It seemed obvious. Then, in the 1960s, he read a book that changed everything, Scarcity and Growth by Harold Barnett and Chandler Morris. They'd done something unusual. They actually looked at the data. Between 1890 and 1957, they found something shocking. The cost of minerals didn't go up as Malthus predicted. It went down, rapidly and persistently. Simon called it the Great Book, which was my tutor. He decided to dig deeper. Consider iron. In 1950, the world's known reserves were estimated at 19 billion metric tons. Over the next 30 years, we extracted 11 billion tons. One would think that would leave us with 8 billion tons remaining. That would be wrong. In 1980, known iron reserves totaled 93 billion metric tons. We used 11 billion tons, but somehow ended up with 74 billion more than we had thought. Simon realized something crucial. The doomsayers were treating resources like a fixed pile of stuff. But that's not how resources work in the real world. When prices rise, people have incentives to look harder for new deposits, develop better extraction technology, find substitutes, and use resources more efficiently. And here was Simon's key insight, the one that would make him famous and controversial. People are not just mouths to feed, they are minds that solve problems. Simon loved quoting 19th century economist Henry George. Quote, both the jayhawk and the man eat chickens, but the more jayhawks, the fewer chickens, while the more men, the more chickens. In other words, animals just consume, humans create. More people means more innovation, More solutions, more abundance. By 1980, Simon was tired of reading Ehrlich's predictions of doom, so he did something brilliant. He turned it into a bet that anyone could understand. In September 1980, Simon published a challenge. Pick any natural resource, pick any time period longer than a year. I'll bet they get cheaper, not more expensive. If resources really are running out like you say, their prices should rise. If I'm right about human ingenuity, prices should fall. Put your money where your mouth is. Erhlich couldn't resist. He later wrote, "The lure of easy money can be irresistible." Erhlich and two Berkeley colleagues, John Hart and John Holdren, picked 5 metals they were sure would get more expensive: copper, chromium, nickel, tin, tungsten. The deal? Start September 1980. Measure prices in September 1990. Adjust for inflation. If prices go up, Simon pays the difference. If they go down, Erhlich pays. The 1980s roar ahead. The Civil War intensifies, the tech revolution begins, and population continues growing. In 1980, the world population was 4.4 billion. By 1990, the population was 5.3 billion. That's 900 million people more demanding resources. If Erhlich was right, this should push prices through the roof. Simon wasn't worried. He understood something about how markets work. When a resource becomes scarce, prices rise. But rising prices do something magical. They signal everyone in the economy to pay attention. Consumers use less, producers look for more, and inventors develop alternatives. Take copper. For decades, it was the way to transmit phone calls and data. As demand grew and prices rose, engineers developed fiber optic cables made from sand that could carry thousands of times more data for a fraction of the cost. This pattern repeats across industries. The resource we need wasn't really copper, it was the ability to transmit information. And that resource actually got more abundant. September 1990 arrives. Time to settle the bet. The results? Copper, down 18%. Chromium, down 40%. Nickel, down 3%. Tin, down 72%. Tungsten, down 57%. Every single metal got cheaper. Simon won decisively. Erhlich wrote him a check for $576.07, the inflation-adjusted difference. But then the story got interesting. You might think that losing a very public bet would cause some self-reflection. Maybe Erhlich would say, perhaps I should reconsider my assumptions. He did not. Instead, Erhlich doubled down. He and his wife, Anne, wrote a 1994 essay titled, and I'm not making this up, Simple Simon Environmental Analysis. They called Simon the absolute equivalent of the flat earthers. Let that sink in. Simon had just proven Erhlich wrong with actual data, actual prices, actual outcomes, and Erhlich's response was to insult his intelligence. This took its toll on Simon. In the epilogue to his book, The Ultimate Resource 2, he wrote about the pain of constant personal attacks. I hope it induces you to imagine what it would do to you to have so many people respond to your work in this fashion. Even colleagues who agreed with him would steer clear publicly. The social cost of contradicting the doomsayers was high. But Simon wasn't done. In 1996, he made an even bolder offer. He bet $100,000 with any prominent doomsayer that by any material measure, life expectancy, resource prices, phone ownership in China, anything, living standards would improve over the next decade. No one took the bet. Not Erhlich, not Lester Brown, not any of the high-profile pessimists. Because Simon was right, not just about metal prices, but about human welfare in general. Life expectancy was up, infant mortality down, access to clean water up, poverty rates down, literacy rates up, death from famine down. Even in China, where Erhlich had predicted mass starvation, average daily caloric intake increased from the 60s through the 80s, and death rates fell. According to the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, from 1948 to 1968, per capita food production was up 28%. From 1968 to 1923, food production rose another 49%. The hundreds of millions that Erhlich said would starve, they didn't. Instead, they thrived. On February 8th, 1998, just 4 days before what would have been his 66th birthday, Julian Simon died unexpectedly. He was 65. His death prompted an outpouring of tributes from economists and scholars, but the mainstream media that had lionized Erhlich barely noticed. Today, most people have never heard of Julian Simon, but Paul Erhlich, he's still making the rounds, predicting catastrophe, and still being taken seriously by many. Let's talk about what the bet means and what it doesn't mean, because this gets to the heart of how we should think about resources, the environment, and the future. First, the critics do have some points. If they had started the bet in different decades, Erhlich might have won. In the 90s, he would have won 6 out of 10 possible decade-long bets. In the 2000s, thanks to China's explosive growth, he'd have won the bet. But economist Hannah Ritchie looked at the long term, 1900 to 2022, and found something fascinating. Prices haven't changed dramatically over 120 years. Some went up a bit, some went down a bit, but overall, the prices were remarkably stable. We now produce 40 times as much copper and 250 times as much nickel annually compared to 1900. 40 times more copper at basically the same price. That's not evidence that we're running out of resources. That's exactly what Simon predicted. Human ingenuity, finding ways to produce more for less. But we need to understand something crucial. The bet was not really about prices. A geologist sees the world as fixed physical quantities. After all, there's only so much copper in the Earth's crust. An economist sees resources differently. What matters isn't the physical quantity. It's how we solve the human coordination problem. If we can get the same energy from half the oil through better engines, we effectively have twice as much oil. If we develop solar panels making oil unnecessary, we've made oil infinite for practical purposes. Think about it. For most of human history, oil was worthless. Actually worse than worthless. People avoided land with oil because it ruined the soil. It only became a resource when humans figured out how to convert it to energy, and it will stop being a resource if we develop alternatives. The real resource was never oil. It was the human ability to produce energy. Same with copper wire. The resource was never copper. It was the ability to transmit information. When we developed fiber optics, we didn't run out of copper. We transcended the need for it. This is Simon's ultimate insight. The ultimate resource is the human mind, our ability to innovate, to adapt, to solve problems. Both the jayhawk and the man eat chickens, but the more jayhawks, the fewer chickens. The more men, the more chickens. While animals consume, humans create. This idea goes back to Adam Smith in 1776. Smith understood that larger populations enabled more specialization, more division of labor, and more innovation. With more people, you can have a person dedicated to making nails, a person dedicated to tanning leather, and a person who just develops new tools. Smith wrote, "The greater their number, the more naturally they divide themselves. More heads have occupied in inventing the most proper machinery for executing the work of each, and it is, therefore, more likely to be invented. More people equals more minds, more ideas, more solutions." Modern economists like Paul Romer formalized this. Economic growth comes from discovering new ideas, and more people means more potential discoveries. This only works with the right institutions. Free markets create price signals. When resources become scarce, prices rise, and prices rise signal to everyone that we need a set of solutions. Those prices signal people to conserve resources, find new sources, develop substitutes, and use what we have more efficiently. Without property rights and prices, you get the tragedy of commons. A common example is the fish in the ocean. No one owns the ocean, so no one has incentive to preserve fish stocks. Everyone races to catch as many as possible before others do. Compare that to privately owned fish farms or catch share programs where fishermen own portions of the total allowable catch. Suddenly, conservation makes economic sense. Or look at the Soviet Union. Central planning, no private property, no market prices. The result? The Aral Sea disaster, Chernobyl, widespread pollution, among the worst environmental records in history. Meanwhile, wealthy market economies have progressively cleaner air, cleaner water, more forests. Technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. Innovation requires institutions, markets, that channel human creativity productively. This was Simon's broader point. The problem isn't too many people. The problem is bad institutions.